All right, so hi guys. We're the
morning.
Retromaniacs Twitch team. We focus on retro games and creating new nostalgia. Basically, we're around the same age, born in the 80s, grew up in the 80s, and just wanted to showcase these retro games to the masses, to this current generation. So,
Right. It's something that that I'm sure between the two of us and then all of the rest of the team and even everyone who's on Twitch who's doing retro gaming, they are like really into as far as kind of going back, playing stuff that they haven't played in a long time or trying games out that they hadn't played at all. And that's kind of the sort of thing that we want to bring as a team. Is just kind of bring all those facets, whether it be blind runs or whether it be speed running or just anything in between, anything that has to do with bringing people back to some of these older games that they might have forgotten about or maybe didn't even know about in the first place. Is it's pretty much what we're all about.
Yeah. Me personally, I love couch gaming. I love having people over and playing games together. And that's how I got into streaming. It's like, well, when people are watching, it's as if we're playing with them. And even challenging games where people chime in and give us little hints on how to beat something. And I felt that communication, and I really loved it. That's what drew me into streaming. So.
Yeah, it's a really awesome feeling when you get to share those really amazing moments where you beat a really hard section or you figured out that puzzle that's been stumping you for the last 20 minutes, and just being able to share that with the community that you that shares those games with you. It's something that's hard to describe until you really feel it. It's really awesome. So
yeah, totally. So who are we? My name is DAIKON, and a little bit of history about me. I was born in the early 80s. First console was my Famicom at the age of 4. First game was Super Mario Brothers and Arkanoid, which actually came with an attachment. It was like a turquoise color with a little nub on it. So you turn it and you attach it to the side of the Famicom. That was my first 2 games. My mother actually taught me how to play Super Mario. She taught me the Infinite Live Chicken 3-1. So like that was like the coolest mother, like in school, right? Like going, hey, she taught me how to do the Infinite Live. And, yeah, and I've been streaming on Twitch for about 4 years, and I started as a retrocaster. I got Twitch partnered as a retrocaster, and I then featured on Twitch front page as a retrocaster. So that's where my heart is, and been having a blast.
yeah, I am KingRadinov. We are actually, like you said, we're about the same age. We started about the same time. However, I did not start as a retrocaster. I started doing various indie games. I was a Warframe streamer for about a year plus. Went back to doing more indie games and then started doing retrocasting probably within the last, I would say, 1.5 to 2 years, something along those lines. My mom was not a great gamer. She would play Super Mario Brothers with me, but I would spend about 10, 15 minutes playing and like, Mom, it's your turn, and then she would die instantaneously, and then it would be my turn again. That was her playing her games with me. But I actually started, I believe the earliest system that I had was the Atari. I had a ton of games for that. And being as young as I was half of them scared me to like adventure. Whenever I would find a dragon, I had to turn off the game. That was it. That I couldn't take care of it. But I've been gaming straight from that point up until now, whether it be retro, modern, like everything in between. Going back and forth between the two. But I've always spent a significant amount of my time just doing lots of gaming. So.
Like math munchers. You know those math munchers, whatever, on the Apple IIe? That scared me. Like those guys had like a huge mouth and just like munching on everything.
It's so weird. Yeah, it's so weird to think that it could something so simple, especially graphically, could be so scary. But yeah, I couldn't handle a lot of Atari games, which is silly to think now. But yeah, there were quite a few Atari games I couldn't handle.
Yeah. So basically, our panel is about streaming retro games, whether it be Twitch, Mixer, Facebook gaming, whether that be, and I know there are some challenges to stream retro games, more so than, let's say, a modern console like PS3 or PS4 or Xbox One or Switch even. But before we get into that, I want to talk a brief about the return of retro gaming. as like from my experience of what I've seen, I'm seeing a lot of first-party companies, whether it be Sony or Nintendo, they're coming out with like throwback consoles, like let's say the NES Mini or classic Mini Super Nintendo, or even like the what is it called now, the Atari, or Atari's going to release something, right?
The
Flashback, I think.
yeah, I'm not sure what theirs is called, but yeah, they're what was that?
No, I said it's overpriced.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, even what else? Oh, Neo Geo Mini that just got released in Japan. It's on pre-order, I think, right now in the States. Stuff like that, and now on top of that, Sony has their PSN, so you can get into your PS3, PS Vita, or PS4, go in and buy your PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 classics for like $5-6 and play them on your model console, which is really cool. Nintendo has the Wii U or the 3DS Virtual Console, so you can play your Nintendo and NES and support titles on Smart TV.
And then the new service that's going to be starting Tuesday, I think, which should have some classic games replayable with online capabilities added in, which is, a huge step, since that's one of the main things that's difficult to do with classic games is be able to play the multiplayer, especially the ones that were meant to be played multiplayer.
And it's really cheap. I think it's like $20 a year on the Switch online. That's really cool.
I heard there might be issues with the cloud.
That is one of the that's one of the concerns I do have because I do like we said, we like to play couch gaming. I like the person physically there playing those retro games. So playing it over the cloud, I'm still kind of wondering how that's going to be.
We're still not sure like your membership pins, will all your cloud saves be deleted with it?
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of details they still have to give for sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
I know there's been a challenge for Nintendo as far as like
the arcade with business practices.
Right.
Yeah. And I know Nintendo always had like issues with the Wii. Let's say if you bought something on the Wii, you can't transfer it over to the Wii U or something like that. There's
Or
always
the money issue, you
Right.
can't use the money, you can't.
Yeah, or something like that. So hopefully that gets ironed out.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
As far as that's concerned, now also third party is releasing hardware like the Retron 5. I actually got to experience the Retro 3, which is a multi-console hardware emulator which supports about 12 different consoles on one unit, and you can attach different controllers or have different features and stuff like that. But which makes it accessible for people that are like short on space or short on money. They have one console that handles every little thing that attaches to the TV, no problem. So there's companies that are doing that, which is really cool. Want to talk about the third one?
Wait,
Yes.
you said 12 and 1?
12 and 1, yeah.
12 and 1.
Retron console.
It's called
Retro
Retro
3.
3.
Yep.
Yeah, it's in Japan.
Oh, it's in Japan right now?
It's only in Japan.
Yeah.
So, no, the ones we saw so far, like
So-
the 5-1, the 5-6.
Retron 5.
Right, yeah. We will see if it comes up here, but who knows.
I hope so.
So, one of the things I would say that people probably know retro gaming for now the most is the GDQ events. Most people, when you let them know about the retro gaming scene, those are the
Okay.
okay.
Oh, sorry about that.
Most people know retro gaming from those, speed running, things of that nature. They have 2 different events throughout the year. They bring in a lot of money for charity, which is a great way to experience, retro gaming if you've never seen it before. Especially considering how many different like amazing things that they can do with, speed running and glitches and whatnot. But that's one of the ways that people really kind of consume it now. There's also YouTube, Let's Plays and reviews and things of that nature. There's game reviews, of course, on YouTube as well. One of those ways that people have really kind of probably the biggest way I would say that most people start back into retro gaming is they saw someone do a gameplay on YouTube, or they saw someone do a review, or they saw AVGN do one of his pieces, or Pat do one of his pieces on a game. And it's like, oh, that's right, I remember that game. Wow, I can't believe that was so amazingly bad. But it's like it's the gateway. Now you remember. Now you're thinking about something that you played before or didn't have a chance to play before, and now you're more interested in jumping back into it. And it's like, okay, this is pretty cool. Let me go take a look at it.
Yeah, YouTube is actually my reason for coming back into retro gaming. I actually found Pat Country, Pat Guinness Punk. I saw his videos like the flea market madness in like the early 2010, 11, and I stopped. I watched them. But there's a point where I stopped playing video games like a whole. I started watching the YouTube, like at the Punk or AVGN. I started to really dive into the retro scene. It brought me back all these memories of my childhood, and that's what really got me back into retro gaming. So YouTube has definitely been the number one inspiration for me to start. I think that has a lot. They have so much influence in video games today.
Yep, and then of course when you get into the more modern games, a lot of them have started to really take a lot of the previous generation's genres or the previous generation's graphical styles. You know, everyone's seen a lot of the pixel art games that have been coming out and things of that nature. So there's a lot of retro influences, especially within the last year or so in modern gaming, especially when you start looking into the indie games that have been started off recently.
Yeah, the first one I started was Shovel Knight.
Yeah, I think that's the one that most people would know.
Right.
Just like as the first thing, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. That seems like something that would have come out, you know, back in the NES days, something like that.
And then
They did a really good job with that.
Right, and now they're doing what is that game? The Castlevania game.
Oh, Castlevania Curse of the Moon.
It's not
something like that.
Castlevania.
Or Bloodstained. Thank you. Yeah, Bloodstained Curse of the Moon.
Bloodstained, yeah.
Yep.
So like stuff like that, like it's just there's a lot of really good games that take those pixel art and bring it into the modern age, and I think that's definitely one of the.
What about Cuphead?
Cuphead, oh I love the Cuphead. Cuphead's a great example.
Yeah, well, yeah, Cuphead's a great example of the gameplay for sure.
Gameplay, mechanics, yes. Graphically, not too much, but the game style, the gameplay difficulty level,
Yeah.
and then you get to play the 2 players co-op. I loved it. I love Cuphead.
Maybe Octopath Traveler too.
I still have not played that game.
You'll lose a lot of time.
I heard it's a very romancing saga. It's from the Super Nintendo era, and I love that game. I love Squaresoft. I'm a big Squaresoft guy. So that's that.
Strong recommendation.
I love it. It's just Square Enix is fantastic. Oh yes.
I was just looking at the picture. I think that picture's hilarious.
So with that, you know, a lot of people there is a lot of market for retro gaming. Now people are curious, how do I stream these retro games? They might not be fitted for modern TVs or modern capture devices. So how do I go about streaming these retro games? And there's several different ways to do it. How we do it is we use the original hardware, which is first party. So if it's a Nintendo console, it'll be the NES or the Super Nintendo, or even the Game Boy, or even in your case, the Sega Game Gear. He streams the Sega Game Gear off the actual Game Gear. But not everybody's able to either afford. There's a lot of challenges that come with an older console, which is 30 years old or whatever, to a modern TV that's within the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, which is why a lot of people will go for the third-party hardware, like the aforementioned Retro Freak or any of the cheaper HD units that have come out for the NES, for the Genesis. There's a lot of choices. You know, some of them obviously better than others, but I mean, it is a legitimate option for trying to get your stream capturable by today's hardware.
Right now, the biggest one I think is Analog MT, right? That was released.
It's like the most expensive one.
Yeah, it's very expensive, but it does Super Nintendo and like perfectly, and it has the HDMI out.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Absolutely.
okay. That's it. Okay, you're talking about the Super Nintendo one. That was not as bad. I thought you were talking about the Nintendo one, the one that was like
I know what you're talking
$500.
about.
Yeah.
I forget what it's called.
Yeah.
Now, so in order to stream these, you need a capture device. You need to capture that video, put it onto your computer, convert it, and then either record it live onto your computer, or you can stream it via streaming software to YouTube or Twitch, Facebook Gaming, what have you. So that's another thing that you have to add into the lineup. Now, capturing, you need a capture card. Now, another thing that is going to be kind of a challenge, but another thing to consider is you need cabling, appropriate cabling. So like the older consoles have a standard cable, like a composite, the red, yellow, white cable. Some of the older ones have RF, like the Atari or the NES has the RF signal. You have S-Video, and also component, and now HDMI. So you have multiple kinds of cabling that you would have to use to capture these devices. So that's something that you have to also think. One of the biggest thing right now is upscaling. So you see upscalers is the number C. Upscalers is basically taking old hardware resolutions that's meant to be shown on the older TVs and then convert it to make it
Converted to the right resolution.
Resolution
Yeah.
for modern TV. So if the older consoles have a so-called 240p, basically 240 pixels wide, then it will convert it so it can output to a 1080p and nice and crystal clear instead of being rather stretched.
Yeah.
So that's that. And want to talk about the monitor?
And yeah, so certain consoles either are basically unable to output or are much harder to output because of whatever output options that they have, in which case you might have to look into actually modding your system.
Sorry. There we go. I was like, go around the next slide.
You might have to look into modding your system in order to be able to capture the footage correctly.
So we'll go back. Let's just go back to this.
Okay.
So, sorry about that. Without the slide removing. But the original hardware, the biggest pro for it is it's accurate, graphically, sound, audio is accurate. So if you hear Mario jump, it's going to sound exactly how you remember as a child. There's no input lag, meaning if you push a button, if you tell Mario to jump, it'll jump without any lag. Some of the third-party consoles, there are little lags. If you push it, it doesn't accept the input right away. It takes a second or so to
when you're pressing a button, it doesn't necessarily show up on the screen exactly when you expect it. So that can be a major issue if you're playing a game that expects like on the moment spot timing, which if you're doing something like the NES that have lots of difficult games could become a problem.
Especially racing games, any games like Ninja Gaiden or something. If you want like the perfect input, if there's a little bit of lag, it could potentially cause problems in gameplay. Another thing is using the original controllers. So if you like to use the original brick NES controller to play your NES games instead of the third-party multi-button controllers, which don't necessarily work as well. 100% game compatibility. So whatever game you put in your NES, as long as your NES works, it's going to work. And some of the third-party hardware may not necessarily support all the games, so this is one of the pros.
Yep.
And let's go to the cons. Well, what are the cons for having an original hardware setup? Well, it depends on the actual device itself. It could cost low or it could be really high.
What tends to happen is a good number of them, there are still a large number of pieces of hardware out there. So for a lot of the older systems, not all of them, but for a lot of them, they're still relatively affordable. However, when you're talking about in comparison to, say, third-party hardware, especially since third-party hardware often can do more than one console at a time, if you're trying to do multiple consoles, then that can start to add up. And again, it fluctuates up and down. You might be able to get something for $30 or it might be $500, depending on the console that you're trying to get. So the costs, especially when you start to look into streaming more than one piece of retro hardware, starts to really stack up and can make it a lot harder.
What did you buy recently?
Sorry?
Maybe you should tell them what you bought recently.
What I bought recently? Oh, you're talking about the Neo Geo
The Neo
thing?
Geo.
Oh, good God. All right, so I'd wanted one for a while, and obviously, if you've ever heard about the pricing on the Neo Geo, it's ridiculous. So I went with an arcade Neo Geo unit, but it was an arcade Neo Geo unit that was consoleized. So it works like a console. I can play it on my TV at home, that sort of deal. But it accepts what they call MVS cartridges, which are the ones that you would have used inside an arcade cabinet. So the big difference being that instead of, say, Super Mario, if it was on a Neo Geo, costing like $500, it would cost something probably close to like $30. Because the arcade stuff is easier to come by. It was in greater circulation. and it didn't have all the frills of like a home console release because you're just putting it in an arcade cabinet. Like, they don't need to have, you know, this really super cool stamp on it or anything like that because who's gonna see it? But yeah, long story short, expensive.
And also another one, yes, like he's saying, availability, because they are discontinued. They're not around in circulation, so they are harder to come by, which can raise demand, raising costs.
Yep.
And another thing is reliability issues. A lot of these hardwares are now 20, 30 years old. Some are going to 40 years old. You know, some electrical parts, capacitors, power, they go out, or if the power cord gives out. So there is reliability issues when it comes to original hardware. And we're going back to display challenges, like how are we capturing these devices? If it's like an Atari, it only has RF output. Now, I don't think any TVs nowadays have RF input, so there is another challenge that comes to having an original console versus, let's say, a third-party hardware. By the way, this picture is the Retro Freak. That is the Retro Freak that supports 12 different consoles. So that's another outlay is third-party hardware like Retron or the Retro Freak. Some of the pros are they're cost-effective per system. So, example, the Retro Freak is I think what, $250?
Yeah, and I can see you counting the number of inputs. I believe some of them are reusable, is how it works.
Yes.
Like the ones for the Game Boy, I believe most of them can plug into the same thing. Yeah, stuff like that. So I think that's how they get to that number.
They probably count Famicom and NESs too.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
It's a little bit cheap.
Yeah.
And I think they even have some extensions that you can add to it to add more consoles. Like you get 4 more consoles, right? I think something like that. It was crazy.
But that's an awesome example of the cost efficiency of going with some of the third-party solutions because it costs more to start. But if you're going to be doing multiple consoles, it actually ends up being less per system than if you were to try to get all the other systems. And then, being that it's newer, you have a better chance of either having more reliability or even just having a better chance of returning it for one that's working if you had an issue. Whereas with, you know, the old consoles, you're just kind of out of luck.
Yeah, and that goes into space efficiency. Like I have 15 different consoles on my rack, and that takes so much more room than, let's say,
Go back to the other picture for that one.
Which one?
Yeah, no, the other one. That one.
Yeah. That's actually my room.
That's his rack.
That's my old setup.
He actually has more now.
A lot more
but
now.
that's kind of
It's
like
about
the
7 or 8
idea.
more consoles on that rack,
Is where
which
you have to, like, they add up. Like, if you're doing one console or two, it's not a big deal. But if you're really trying, like, you really want to play, like, a lot of, that's the sort of thing you can expect.
And I cropped the bottom because there's cabling that I don't want to show. So the bottom part has been cropped out. So space efficiency, like the Retro Freak is about yay big. So it's just like the size of a Super Nintendo. So having one of those right there.
Yeah, if you've got space for like a DVD player, you probably have space for something like this. I mean, slightly a little bit more because it's, you know, more vertical, but same general idea.
Yeah. Versatility, of course, goes right into basically per system. There's 12 consoles on the Retro Freak, so of course it's just much more efficient than just having one console do one thing. The HDMI out.
Yes.
So if you were playing the older consoles that had a limited number of outputs, the HDMI out on those Retro Freak or Retron 5 will make it easily accessible to people that have modern TVs. And of course the availability because it's brand new.
Right, you can actually find it in stores new if you need to, so that's always really extremely helpful. And again, the HDMI can't be stressed enough with that being the standard of today. You can find modern consoles with HDMI, but anything that you're trying to do that's old, most of the time is either going to need to be modded or is going to need some sort of an adapter, like the GameCube adapter that just came out recently. So yeah, it becomes HDMI is a huge selling point of these newer ones.
Yeah, for sure. And then we're going to cons. Obviously, the biggest one is compatibility. A lot of the Super Nintendo, a lot of the special chips were built into not the hardware, but in the cartridges themselves. So now if these consoles do not support these chips, it won't be able to run these games.
Like X2 and X3.
Yep, or the SA1 or the
Right.
Super Effects chip. Or even on
Right.
the NES, it had special like mappers that not all these consoles can support.
Right, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, you have like if you're picking up an older system, then you know if you're picking up, as long as it's working, if you've got a game for that system, it's going to work. Whereas with any of these third-party hardware, you want to do your research and you want to see not only what issues they may have, because there's always going to be something, because it's almost never going to be 100% compatibility, but you just want to see if those issues are going to affect you. Because it could just be a handful of games, but it could also be a large portion of the games. So you have to take that extra step to make sure that it's not going to affect the exact thing that you tried to get it for.
The another thing is emulation issues. I mean, these are hardware devices, but they are basically emulators that run these games. So emulation, there might be some flaws, whether that be color palette issues, sound issues. Like for me, when I played, I think Mario on the Retron, Mario just didn't sound right. It sounded off. Like, growing up as a kid playing for 30-some years, if you play it on a different system, it doesn't sound right. It bugs me. It might not bug everybody, but to some people it might be a thing. So
Gets you out of the nostalgia.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely with the nostalgia.
Or what was the one that Guma was mentioning? There was an issue where I guess he was playing Mega Man X on something, and he went. It was on the Retron. So he went to the first stage, went to Chill Penguin, and I guess if he reflects your bullet at just the right time or something like that, it just completely resets the game. Yeah. So things like that. I mean, really odd kind of glitchy things can happen when they're just trying to emulate the hardware instead of actually being the hardware. So it's just the sort of thing that, again, you just have to research and kind of be aware of when you're looking at third-party consoles.
Yeah, and the input lag has one of the big things for some people. If you're a fighting game fan or a racing game fan, where the input timing really matters. These might give an issue. I know I played the Retro Freak. I think it has about almost like a quarter of a second input lag. So if you're playing an RPG where input doesn't really matter so much, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're playing like Mario Kart, or whatever,
Or pretty much any platformer.
any game that requires accurate input,
Yes.
it might be some issues. That's something to consider as well.
Yep.
And we were talking about upscaling.
Yes.
So, you want to go with the upscaling?
So again, upscalers are something that help you modify or upscale the resolution to your modern TV, because all of these older systems are going to display at a much smaller resolution, and simply plugging them directly into a capture card or into a monitor will not often result in the picture that you're looking for. Oftentimes it'll just stretch it across, or it'll try to display it in some very non-standard fashion, and then it just, especially if you know what it's supposed to look like, you'll notice the difference. So there are a number of different upscalers. The main three that are used, that we use or that we know of, are the FrameMeister, the OSSC, and then the RetroTink, which has been released recently. It hasn't been out quite as long. The FrameMeister is kind of the gold standard for the most part for most people who are trying to get into doing any kind of like retro game streaming from actual consoles. FrameMeister is also about $300 and no longer being sold, so it's probably more than that if you try to get it from somebody. So it's a lot harder to get. But that being said, it gives you the most number of options as far as tweaking your image and whatnot, and it has the most number of inputs, as you can see, with the composite, the S-video, the component, the SCART, and the HDMI.
Will it help you play like the older consoles on a modern TV?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, all these solutions that we have that we would go into a capture card for can absolutely 100% be
It
used.
brings up a lot of the signal as well.
Yes.
There's also, they do a little bit of processing, so not only does the resolutions look nice, like the colors look clearer and everything just looks clearer than just going standard cable right into the TV.
Right.
Also, they're also Yeah, FrameMeister. There's also cheaper options out there.
Yes.
But like there are little boxes from like China or something. That
Oh,
cost
right.
$20. But I started out with.
Yeah,
They usually have like terrible input lag.
yeah, the
input lag,
old,
yeah.
not
And
the
they
old,
just
the,
stretch the image out. And
yeah,
it doesn't-
those RGB
Yeah.
boxes.
They sure exist.
I think
Oh, yeah.
I think
I
most
have
people
several.
who have tried to get into doing any kind of RGB, either streaming or just trying to mod their console for RGB, have probably started with those things. And I mean, for what they're for and how much they cost, it's a good start. But yeah, there are definitely better options out there. Pretty much anything here is a better option.
Yeah.
The OSSC is like another step down, but it's still really, really robust. It
You
doesn't
have
have
an OSSC.
Yeah, I mean, well, when I say step down, I just mean as far as not having as many options for tweaking it, but it still gives you plenty of options. It doesn't have as many inputs, but it has the VGA input, which is something that the FrameMeister doesn't. But that doesn't actually come up all that often. As a matter of fact, the only thing I can think of that you can use with that is Dreamcast.
Dreamcast, yeah.
So, and then the Retro came out recently, which is kind of the budget option, so to speak. It doesn't really have any tweaking at all, but it's far more affordable, and then it gives you the options for a lot of the inputs that we here in the U.S. would probably end up using, being composite, S-video, or a component.
I
So
think it's like $50.
no,
50 or
it's
60.
no, I think it's closer to about like yeah,
$100?
exactly. Oh, you have one? Oh,
Oh,
awesome.
nice.
It's supposed to be mailed out this month, but nothing happened. So.
Uh-oh, okay.
So why would we use something like a FrameMeister or an OSSC? So
It's a little bit harder to see.
Yeah, this is kind of hard to see, but if you use a composite cable, you'll see some image like that on the left, and then S-video, which is a higher quality
Yeah.
cable, then the composite, which is a yellow cable. It'll be much clearer, and then what we do is the RGB is, let's say, much clearer than let's say, composite cable.
And one thing to really take into consideration, and was something that we were talking about when we were putting this together, is that, and again, it's really hard to see here. Obviously, the composite is going to be the worst of them all, and I can tell you right now, it's actually really blurry. Even the cleaned up version of it is pretty blurry. But one thing to really keep into consideration is unless you really, absolutely, 100% are desperate to have the best picture, S-video is actually really clear compared to the composite, and then not that much of a step down from RGB or component. So if it's a matter of choice and you want to get a good picture, that's probably the best way to do it without breaking the bank, is just go with S-video. Because in 99 cases out of 100, it's really just going to be just a cord that you have to get for your thing. Like most consoles support it, even if it didn't necessarily come with one, but you can find a cord that will produce that signal, and it will be much, much cheaper than doing what we did.
Yeah. We can dive into the cost
Yeah.
a little bit later on that.
I don't want to.
So how do you get like a clear picture like this, like on an RGB or let's say S-video? Some consoles require modifications. So basically what modding is any alterations to an original hardware to either change, fix, or tweak something that, let's say, the hardware couldn't do or can do. Mostly it's in graphical, whether that be graphical meaning like the output, let's say the composite or the RGB, or the console wasn't made to do that specific output, you can modify it so it can do that. Audio modding, some consoles only do mono output, so some people modify some does stereo output.
Or like
Not all.
the it's like a master system modding for the FM output, so that you can actually listen to those tracks that you wouldn't normally be able to if you were using the US system.
Also the output, obviously the output would be the cabling.
For the
Yeah,
sorry,
I think I got graphical and output.
yeah.
Physical modding. There's some consoles that don't accept controllers. Let's say a handheld. Some people modify it so you can attach a controller to it. What was the 3DS? The 3DS, they had a GameCube mod where you can attach a GameCube controller to a 3DS and you can play it. Which is really nice if you're trying to stream a 3DS.
Yep. Or adding TV out to something that didn't already have it, like the Game Gear, or
Actually, you can explain. Yeah, talk about your Game Gear mod.
I just got mine back recently, my Game Gear mod, which it didn't take too long. It was about a month or so. I sent it to the guy who actually created the mod. But what it did was he cleaned up a lot of the I don't want to say the inside, a lot of the components inside that tend to fail on the GameCube, the Game Gear. And then he added a VGA out so that I could, get video out and then use the headphone jack in order to get the audio out. So, I mean, now we're at a point now where a lot of these systems do have that. Not all of them do. Unfortunately, the Neo Geo Pocket Color has not been, doesn't it?
I don't think there is a mod.
No, that's the point. There should be. There should absolutely be. And I'm ready for it. My soul is anyway.
I don't think even the Water Swan has an option for it either.
No,
yeah.
I don't think so.
So with that, once we get all the cables and all that things ready, now the next step is to get a device that captures these signals, so which is usually a capture card. There's many companies out there that have many different cards that they offer that offer different inputs. I know Elgato has the older one supported composite inputs. The newer one only does HDMI. But if you have, let's say, an upscaler that usually comes with an HDMI out,
right,
you can capture it that way. That's how I do it. We do it actually. He does the OSSC. I do the FrameMeister, which both have HDMI out. So if you have an HDMI capture device,
yeah, that's one of the nice things about doing one of the upscalers is because they do convert it over for you. I mean, you can just simply go with something that will like an adapter, but then of course you run into the resolution issues that we were talking about before. So. And
the capture card has to support that input.
Right, exactly. So.
We both use the DataPath card, which is a company from the UK. They actually specialize in doing capture devices for hospitals, so medical facilities. So they have they're great. They don't capture audio, but we have other ways to go around breaker box and stuff like that for audio.
Like usually I capture my audio from the actual OSSC. I just output it from there, and so that way, that's how I get mine. I don't know how to get yours.
I use a audio de-embedder.
Oh, right, yeah. Right. So he splits his audio first, so before it even gets to the.
Right. So it's basically like a switch, like an HDMI switch, which has an output, a breakout box for audio, and I put that into my mixer and then sync the video with the mixer. So actually, I did that just mostly because I wanted the what is it called? So I could be able to rate the box up and down on demand whenever I want. Instead of going into like a Windows volume or something and bring it up and down, I can just go right in the mixer and bring the volume up and down. Actually, one of my favorites was a company called Microsoft. They actually make the FrameMeister hardware, but their cards, external cards, are absolutely brilliant. They're great cards. They do come with a cost, but Microsoft's internal card actually supports the most inputs of any capture card I've ever seen. I think it accepts, I think it does RF too. I know it does RF, composite component, VGA, DVI, HDMI, and it's almost like endless. So Microsoft is definitely one of the ones that I really like. What about you?
The only other one that I personally had any kind of experience with that you haven't mentioned already is AVGC. And they're probably, along with Elgato, probably the most known as far as general public goes. Like the last three are well known among people who tend to do a lot of capturing for their consoles, but not necessarily, outside of that. I used an AVGC card earlier, probably near the beginning. It didn't work as well for me, but they also, from what I understand, don't tend to work that well, or at least the version I was using didn't work that well with my streaming software, which was OBS. But if I had, say, been using Expert like you had been, it shouldn't have been as much of an issue.
Well, yeah, that's actually a good segue right into streaming software.
Yes.
Desktop specs matter when you're using an external capture card?
It actually depends. Most of it depends on what sort of input you're using, because of the fact that some older generation capture cards are USB 2 only, and then USB 2 has a limit of bandwidth. USB 3, I think it doesn't, it's kind of CPU intensive to convert the signal versus USB 2, at least from my experience of it.
Yeah.
They use like 20% less CPU.
USB 2 tends to have a delay in whatnot, and then
USB 3, I ran capture cards using a laptop, like a generic laptop, not even a powerful desktop replacement. They ran fine.
Were you able to get 60 frames?
Yes.
Because I'm using AVGC 2 on a desktop with 2.0 USB. It does 1080, but I'm not getting the 60 frames.
Depends on the device, especially if you said the USB 2 device, it might not. Does it support the 60 or does it do 720?
It's supposed to be 1080, 60 frames per second.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it might be the limiting factor of the USB 2. Because I know when I use those kind of cards, I usually do 720, 60, and I worked out better.
720.
Yeah,
On the
720p.
USB 2?
Yes. Resolution-wise, basically 1080p is double the resolution of 720p pixel count-wise. So if you do 1080, 30, it's almost like a 720.
So do you think if I dial it back to 720, I'm more likely to
Yeah.
get the 60?
Oh yeah. Give that a shot. I think that will work. Yeah. Especially if you're doing retro consoles. Not a lot of retro consoles supported 1080 anyways, so I think 720p would be.
Is that the reason why the upscalers look a little bit fuzzy?
That will depend on the cable. We'll talk more about that. Yeah. That's what upscalers do. So basically, if you're taking a pixel, then they'll multiply by 4, so it'll be 4 pixels will be 1, or times 1 pixel. So it'll be nice and perfect. That can be yes, so streaming software. So you capture the signals. So what software do you use? There's two main streaming software, which is OBS and XSplit. You use OBS.
yes.
I use XSplit.
Yeah, and they're both viable. XSplit probably has more features overall, but XSplit does cost a month. It's monthly, right? A monthly
Yearly.
fee or yearly fee. So it's really dependent on what works best for the caster. Obviously, if you're just starting out, it's probably best to start with OBS. Make sure it's something you want to do, and then you can always try to upgrade to XSplit afterwards. But OBS in and of itself is perfectly viable to use long term. I would say most streamers probably use it, and it's got amazing compatibility with lots of different devices, that sort of thing. So that's usually not an issue. There are a lot of streaming software choices that are coming kind of down the pipe that will give more options, but most of them right now for retro streamers aren't really viable because they either don't have capture card support yet, or they don't have a versatile capture card support yet. So they only support a handful of, say, like Elgato cards or something like that, where like if you happen to have that card, then you're fine. But if you don't, then you kind of gotta wait.
So with that would be basically the whole setup. We want to get in. This is probably going to be the meat and potatoes of it. It's going to be the challenges of having the retro stream setup.
This is the current picture, by the way.
That's my challenge right now. Is that
That's yeah.
yeah, it just got worse. Like I said, I added more consoles, so there's more cables that are coming down. Yeah, it's bad. We took that picture a couple days ago. Yeah, yesterday.
It's like it was yesterday.
That's what it looks like right now.
I don't even have the room for all that stuff.
That's kind of where we're going with where space efficiency tends to be a large part of the problem with this. Where again, if you're simply doing one system, it's not as big of a deal. But when you start adding a whole bunch of systems, that's when it starts to really become a problem. And then also even just when it comes to just your power sources for these systems, a lot of the older systems had the large bricks. It wasn't just like a small little plug, it was a large brick. So even if you're trying to be efficient and you're trying to use some sort of a power strip, you might not be able to get more than 2 or 3 things on there depending on how big that brick is. I know whenever I was trying to do Sega CD or anything like that, like legitimately I could only use that one strip for the Sega, and then anything else that needed to be plugged in had to be plugged in somewhere else.
I was just thinking the AVGN 32X episode.
Yes. You start
Ban these!
Yes, I love that episode.
And then, it also goes to how much power that they're going to be pulling too, because if you've got that stuff hooked up all the time, because like a normal person, you wouldn't want to keep having to pull it off, put it away, and put it back on. Then those things are always plugged in. They're always taking in a little bit of juice, so they're gonna start, using more power as you go along.
That's probably one of the biggest things. Like my stream room, I'm not even kidding, only has 4 outlets. So, and I have about 20 devices hooked up to it. So it's definitely a challenge. Yeah, it's 4 outlets.
4 outlets, yes.
Outlets, yeah.
Yes.
You have a lot of power
Strips?
Power strips?
circuit protector.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I have those.
Each outlet has a circuit protector in it.
Not necessarily. No, I don't daisy chain though. There is one daisy chain. You actually see there's a rack mount unit up there. I used to use that when I was playing as a musician. I had a rack mount thing. So that actually is a DJ light switch. So there's 8 switches, and each of them it's like a power strip, but you can turn on and off each device. So I talked to one of my electrician buddies, and he said, as long as they're all off, it only takes 1 power, so you can daisy chain as much as you want. I was like, great. So now actually I ran out of space. I need another one for all my consoles, but that 16 devices now connect to 1 outlet on a power strip. So there's a power strip, and then that's daisy chain on top of that.
Yeah.
We're running into a problem when we try to play some of our retro games and the TV is plugged into the same outlet. It's pulling too much power and the TV turns off.
Oh wow, that sounds
I've
like an
never
issue
heard
with
that.
maybe an issue in the cabling in the house.
I think it might also be the power strip itself, because what ends up happening is it's like, all right, I'll unplug it. Put it back in that same outlet on the power strip, it will still flicker. If I move it to another plug on the power strip, it will be fine. And I'm now rotating between the same 3 outlets on this power.
yeah,
I
they
think I
need
just need a
to.
better power strip.
Yeah.
I like nowadays. I like the smart power strips. Have you heard of the smart ones? They actually have a remote on it. So if you're you don't have to go all the way to the strip and turn it off. You can have a switch.
Oh, I need that.
Like you saw it on my desk. Yeah.
I didn't know what it was.
Yep.
Well, now I do. Now I do, but I didn't know before.
Then of course power efficiency. Yeah. Space efficiency. Like you said, like how do you get how do you have so much space? I try to use vertical space as much as possible. That's why you have a rack mount. So you could, if you take one area, you can go higher, right? Yeah. So, but it's still.
Yeah, and I do more or less the same thing, with the one caveat being that my stuff is unfortunately not always hooked up. I have my stuff in another room, which I have to bring it over. But it's vertical space, which is going to be the best way
Always.
in most cases for you to be able to make space for that sort of thing.
Do you, just for your current setup, do you play all your consoles like every day or the same week? Or
Yes, I do.
every single one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
I was just
this
curious
is
because
where
I'm just-
we'll get into the challenges and what we did for
So
it.
if I do that, that costs me like all night, and I'm not going to bed till like 9 a.m. in the morning. I do that
Yeah.
once, like,
Because the reason why I ask is what I do, usually if I know I'm gonna play, like if I know I play a certain console a lot, I usually put like a certain amount of it instead of
Right.
everything at once.
Right.
So yeah, like if I play like the PS4 more and the PS3 the same, I just put a couple consoles there and put the rest of my shelf. But yeah, but then you say like every single one in the same week, right?
Right. Yeah. Especially when it comes to retro games, a lot of games are short. So if I'm streaming and I beat a game, and
Right, you can switch it back.
I can switch right away
to
to
something.
another
He
console.
just has to go boop, 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 and then he's ready to go.
I have this set up down. We can talk about it. Definitely a challenge is, as you can see, is cable management. I don't know how people do it. I can't. I just can't.
do you try to get like the long ones just for like for more range, or do you like try to get like the shorter one just for less?
I don't like the shorter ones because if it's longer, you can always tighten it up, right? But if it's short and if you don't have enough room, then it's kind of SOL. So
Yeah, I just recently ordered like a 12-foot, and I thought, maybe I'm overdoing it. I was like, no way. If I get the 6-foot, I might need some more.
Right.
I should
Always
probably
go-
get the 12-foot.
yeah, always go with the longer cable. Yeah, and of course the cost we were just talking about.
Right.
Original consoles are
Yep.
expensive, and they also have accessories. If you want to play a 4-player game,
Right.
you might need what is it called? A multi-tab?
Yep,
And
multi-tab,
so
yeah.
Right? Like they don't reproduce those.
They Yeah, they don't
reproduce
produce many,
what the
but-
multi-taps.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, none of that stuff is being like reproduced. Well, I mean, for certain accessories, especially controllers, like regular controllers, like you might be able to find third-party stuff that's being created now, more so now within like the last couple of years than it was in the past. But in general, most of the time, you're not going to be able to find the stuff that you're looking for, as far as like stuff that was less needed. Like a multi-tap isn't something that I think a third-party company nowadays would worry too much about making, because the chances of that getting used aren't really that high. Because now a lot of times now when people do multiplayer games, they're doing them online.
Right.
You know, couch co-op isn't as much of a thing now, so it's not as much of a market.
Yeah. Yeah. And also that goes with what you were saying before, because you get a multi-tap, the controllers are 6 feet long.
Yes.
And I don't know about you guys, but my TV is at least 10 feet away from my couch, right? At least.
Yes, yeah, so then you gotta
definitely
get the
more cables,
extensions.
more extenders and stuff like
You
that.
have to get like the Super Nintendo forward.
Extenders, yep. They're about $10 each. But yeah, if you get 4 of them, now that's $40.
Yeah, and that just, there's just more costs. Cabling costs a lot. Even if it's cheap for one, you might not need just one. If you're just, by yourself and you just spend one system, then yeah, maybe, but it could cost a lot. And then the modding, or if you have to mod to be able to get your system to play on play for the capture card or play on your TV for whatever reason, that's gonna cost a lot more. Because most of those mods tend to be relatively expensive as far as like for what they do.
Yeah.
And
Like, what is it? The 3DS mod is
Oh my
a couple
God, yes.
$100. If you want to do NES, requires a NES RGB chip, which is like another $100. Yeah, your Game Gear
The
mod
Game
was a couple
Gear,
$100.
all together with everything included, including the shipping, was something like $225 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then just trying to maintain everything. In general, a lot of these older systems were pretty robust, so they don't tend to just go. But there are circumstances where they can end up doing that, and then if you have an issue, you can attempt to either replace it, which means you have to take kind of a chance on a new system that might have issues too, because they're all old, or you have to try to find a way to get it repaired, which can be as expensive or more expensive than trying to get a quote new system.
Well, I mean, if you even think like optical drives, optical systems like PlayStation, Saturn,
Yep.
Those are now 20, 23, 24 years old.
Yep.
Those lasers are going to go. Maybe the system doesn't spin or doesn't read.
My
There's-
GameCube is
The GameCube is another one.
Mhm.
PlayStation 2, Dreamcast is now in that.
like, I'm
20-year-old.
fortunate, my Wii still works. Granted,
Right,
I
yeah,
had
so you can do the.
I even had to get the lens replaced.
Yeah. And at least
And-
the Wii is, you can still use the Wii U and have backwards compatibility. So.
But yes, with some of these,
Yeah.
if you have an issue with it, especially the ones that are really kind of unique, you're just
Like a
you're out of
3DO
luck.
or something, a CDI, and
Oh my God.
God forbid that breaks. But yeah, those are additional costs that you have to consider.
Yep.
So there's a lot of challenges, and finally, screen issues, resolution. Some games, like the PlayStation,
yes.
the fifth generation
Yes.
console, like the PlayStation N64, Saturn, they run at a set resolution, which is 240p.
Yep.
But they have the potential to output at double the resolution, which is 480i or 480p.
Yep.
So now, like if you load a PlayStation game, if the menus look like those games that have really crisp menus, but then you get into the gameplay, it's kind of the lower resolution. Yeah, so it's basically
Yes.
it's switching, or the FMVs, the videos within the game, they could be rendered at higher resolutions to make it look really, really nice. But now if you're using a FrameMeister, an upscaler, which is basically saying, well, here's a signal, a video signal that's coming in, and we're uploading it to 1080p, but there's some switch within the game. Well, then the FrameMeister has to kind of recalibrate itself to that new resolution. So there might be a point where there's a blank screen for a couple seconds. In some cases, up to 10 seconds. And that could be another challenge. I tried playing Persona on the PlayStation, the original Persona, and if you're on the overworld map, there's one resolution. If you go into a battle, there's another resolution. So if you go into a battle, it flickers for about 5 seconds. Then you go into battle, you play the battle, and once you get out of the battle, another flickers. And if you go in the menu, it's another resolution, so it's almost unplayable,
You'll
basically.
never
Yeah.
see it coming.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
exactly. And I had the exact same issue when I was playing on the Genesis on Castlevania Bloodlines. Whenever I would go from a menu to the start of a stage, it would actually flicker out, and it would take a couple of seconds for it to actually to come back on. So I'm sitting here and I'm watching the I've got my monitor and I've got the preview for OBS, and I'm watching the preview for OBS because that clicks in first before my monitor clicks in to make sure that I'm not getting hit by something just flying in at the beginning of the stage, because I had to deal with that like click over.
Yeah,
So,
I've watched some streams where they're using an Elgato, and they'll say no signal.
Yep.
And no signal stream
Yes.
will come on for about 5 seconds, and
Yep.
then it just goes back.
and that's exactly what that is. It's the resolution changing, and then all the hardware trying to catch up with it and say, okay, wait, how do I do this signal again? Okay, all right, I'm good, and then it's outputs it.
Is it the same when you play Persona 1 on the PS3?
No, that's actually different because the PlayStation 3 actually emulates the PlayStation 1. So they're running it on the PlayStation 3 resolution. So it's already at a set resolution on the PS3. So that's actually, thanks for asking. So that's actually one of the loop around.
Yeah, it's one of the ways that you can get around it
Get around
is
it,
playing
yeah.
it on the
But isn't
PS3
it just
instead.
reading the disc?
No, that's like if you if you put it in a disc, it's still running an emulator on the 3PS.
It's not running the actual hardware.
There's no-
It's
there's no actual
it's running
hardware.
it as
So
more
this
software.
isn't even spinning.
Oh, it is. But
It
it's
still
like
has to
running
read the
it.
information, but it's not out. It's not actually using. It's not as if there's a PS1 inside of it,
Right.
as much as it's just doing software emulation for the PS1.
Yeah.
So they can tweak a little bit more. Like it's not like one for one, from the PS1. They just made their own emulation software
So
for.
it's just
for
emulating the BIOS of
Yeah,
the phone?
essentially, yeah. If you have the original PS3, that has actually a built-in PS2 hardware inside.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually running a PS2.
right.
It's not 100%. It's not 100%.
Exactly. Again, it goes back
Yeah,
to the emulation. It's
exactly.
not
Anytime you're
100%
not using the
compatible.
the hardware, that's when you run into those compatibility issues, which is why you have to do the research and you have to decide whether or not those are going to be a deal breaker for you. So,
Yeah, that's
Just
why.
not use an upscaler in that case. Could you just skip that so that you don't have these limits? Like if it's going to be like that much of a problem in the game.
Right. Yeah,
She's
but
got a good point. Like
it is.
It messes with the picture quality, but what's the trade-off?
right, you have to decide which
Yeah.
one is going to work for you. Like for me,
Well,
Oh, that was loud.
that's the problem, because if you go directly in, if the like let's say the NES or N64 is only doing 240p,
Yeah.
you're essentially, that's all this PC's going to see is the 240p signal. So now if you're at a 1080 and you have to stretch it, you're literally stretching the whole entire thing. So that's a big trade-off, I think. Everything's done
That is the
really
boss
well.
battle we have to do with Heroes.
I think I just find it easier to just do like full on RCA, because I've done the upscaler and then okay, well I'm gonna get input lag. So like doing it on like and then like I do it on the flat screen and then like, well this is just blurring out my pixels. Right. So then, and then I do the RCA through the CRT, and then everything looks perfectly fine. And then I look on the capture, right, and it's actually viable to play from the capture screen because there's no input lag because there's nothing to convert anything.
Right.
and that kind of goes back to what we were talking about. Like you have to find which way is going to work best for you, especially when it comes to like any time that you do any of the
All
upscaling or
digital,
anything like that.
ultimately, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
anything
yeah.
you do, you convert it to digital, you're going to have some sort of lag. So I mean, if you can find a way to do it like you're doing it now, and it makes sense for you, and it works, and you're not getting that lag, and you're happy with that picture, then that's the way to go for it. Absolutely, especially since it means that you don't have to spend more to try to do something else that might not work.
I might not even need a CRT because I have like a capture card that takes an RCA.
Yeah.
Right. Nowadays, actually, people are even going to, like, now people use PVM. You don't even need a PVM anymore. You can use a CRT computer monitor, and OSSC does a VGA out, and then you can go right there. There's absolutely no lag.
Yeah, there are a lot more options
There's
now
only
than
like
there used to
two
be, for
issues
sure.
I find with my rig, right, with the way I'm doing it, like the motion, it gets, whenever, because I was playing Soul Calibur 2, the GameCube version,
Yeah.
and I noticed that I don't have any issues with the frame rate, but
Right.
certain motions are making it look like there's like invisible lines, and then they disappear.
Is it like interlacing?
Sort of.
That's
Like, I
that's
don't know what
one
to call it.
that's one of the things because those are it depends on what the resolution the game is running at. So there's two different sorts of refresh resolutions. So there's let's say there's 480p or 1080p here, right? That's progressive scan.
Okay.
So basically the whole picture is rendered in one shot. But previous times to get the 1080, they had to use 1080i, which is interlaced. So it's every other line gets rendered at a time. So if you have a high motion, it looks like it's like this kind of. You see, what is it? The lines kind of.
Yeah.
Looks
Yeah.
like it's torn apart and it's trying to catch up because one frame is rendered before the other. You see what I'm saying? So that's why it looks like every other line is like behind one.
Is there any way to alleviate that?
That's where the upscaler comes in because some of the upscalers have a de-interlacer built in. I know some of the software like OBS or XSplit or the capture devices, they have a de-interlacer within it, and you might have to check that option. But these upscalers have those de-interlacers already in there, so you can put them all together if there's a game that's in 480i or 1080i.
And then the other issue is, so I'm using splitters and an extension cable. And I've noticed one picture looks better than the other, right? And then when I reverse it, well now the capture looks better, but I'm noticing that, I think there's some like signal loss, right?
Depends on the output, yeah. Especially if it's analog. Yeah.
Is that caused by like the splitters and the extension?
Yes,
Well, especially if the splitters aren't powered too.
Right.
Yes.
Depends on the cabling. So if you're using analog cables, yes, it's going to deteriorate the longer you go. If it's digital, if it's amplified, it just takes digital signal and amplifies it. So you can have a length, it doesn't really matter as long as it's amplified. Analog for sure. The longer the extension, it's going to deteriorate.
Okay. I heard like an amplifier distributor alleviates that. Does that solve the problem with the interlacing?
No, you will need a de-interlacer.
The de-interlacing, and that's only from upscalers strictly.
Not necessarily. There are software de-interlacers. So check your capture device. They might have it.
It's a GV USB 2,
Yeah.
and it's from Japan.
It might. But check your streaming or get video capture software. They might have those options in there.
Video capture?
Yeah, like if you use OBS or XSplit.
I use Streamlabs OBS.
Yes,
Yeah.
they should have
Yeah,
it, because
same,
I know
yeah.
I've done it before in the past. But the interlacer. So, yeah, I know we're out of time, but we'll be around. We'll be
Yeah,
around. If
we'll
you
be
have any
back.
more questions.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you so much, guys. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you guys coming out.
Oh, thank you, guys. Thanks so much for having us, really.